So you want to bet on the NFL this week, but you don't want to just throw your money away, right? Well, these are the most profitable bets that I've found for week 14. And let's start with the Jets quarterback, Mike White, whose line is at 249.5 passing yards. Now, in the last 2 games, he's easily cleared this number, going for over 300 yards apiece in each of his starts. But we must discuss these starts individually. In week 12 against Chicago, he faced arguably the worst pass defense in the NFL that was down 7 starters that specific week. So he had a good game, we give it to him, but it was in an easy matchup. And then last week against Minnesota, who's also a bottom 10 secondary, he throws 57 times. So yeah, if you're not clearing 250 passing yards on 57 attempts, you probably shouldn't be starting in the NFL. But this week, he's not facing a bottom 10 defense. Actually, he's facing the complete opposite, the Bills, who have a top 10 secondary. And very quietly, Mike White last week averaged around 6 yards per attempt, which is not good. That's not good by any means. So if he does that on less attempts now, he's not going to hit this number. And we start this show off by taking the under, the less on Mike White at 259.5 passing yards. And then we move on to another AFC quarterback. And that'll be the Broncos quarterback, Russell Wilson, who his prop is set really low at 210 passing yards because boy, oh boy, have things been rough in Denver. It's unlikely that Cortland Sutton is going to play this week. KJ Hamler's already out, and you're seeing Jerry Jeudy battle injury. It's not great for Wilson and his receivers. A poor passing offense is getting worse. So we're going to take the under here, right? Hold on just a minute. You see, the Broncos are 9-point underdogs versus Kansas City. And this season, as an underdog, Russell Wilson is averaging over 220 yards per game, 223 to be exact. And now he has Mike Boone, a pass-catching running back, getting healthier and more involved, so that's easy yards, as well as Jerry Jeudy getting healthier and the rookie tight end Greg Dulcich getting more experience by the week. So I expect Wilson to throw a bunch here, and we're going to be taking the over 210 passing yards. I have him for around 223. So let's leave this quarterback position for now and slide into the tight ends. And we look at a guy that maybe you don't even know, and his name is Jack Stoll. He's been the starting tight end for the Eagles with Dallas Goedert out. His line this week is 8.5 receiving yards, and over his first 2 games without Dallas Goedert, he just had 1 catch combined in the 2 games for 7 yards. But let's look at these games. His first start in week 11 against Indy, okay, it's his first ever start. He's not the most athletic tight end. He's not that involved. All right, we can give him a pass there for not playing well. Against Green Bay, none of the receivers had a big game here because they ran for about 400 yards. But then last week against the Titans, in a matchup where they clearly wanted to throw the ball, that got him more involved. He ran a season high 30 routes, which is elite usage for a tight end, and it led to 3 catches for 41 yards, easily going over 8.5 receiving yards. And now this week right now, he's facing a worse defense than what the Titans are, and the Giants, who rank 31st in coverage. This is a really good spot to take the over 8.5 receiving yards for Jack Stoll. Now let's talk about his division rival, Saquon Barkley, who are not going to be focused on this running back's rushing numbers, but his receiving numbers, the prop of 3.5 receptions. Saquon comes into this game as a 6-point underdog to the Eagles, and believe it or not, he has not been that great of a receiver this year. He's averaging just about 4 targets per game, which is not that great, but his efficiency numbers, 24th in running back efficiency, 28th in yards per reception. I mean, these are awful numbers for a starting running back like Saquon Barkley. Now, if you look at his last couple of games, he has topped this 3.5 number in back-to-back games, 4 and 5, and he's seen 5 or more targets in 3 straight games. So that's great usage, but that's skewing this number upwards. Because on the season, he's only averaging about 3 catches per game. The recency bias of these last 2 games is skewing this number upwards, but now he gets a matchup versus the Eagles, who don't give up a lot of catches to the running back position. But with this in mind, I take the under on Saquon Barkley, who I have projected for 2.8 receptions this week in the player props tool on Patreon. So from one elite running back to the next, let's move to Tennessee. And let's discuss Derrick Henry, whose prop right now is at 82.5 rushing yards, even though he's topped this number just 1 time in the last month. And man, last week got really bad, a season low 30 rushing yards. But let's break this down. Henry has been an underdog in his last 3 games coming in. Against the Eagles, they end up losing by 25. Against the Bengals, they end up losing by 4, trailing for most of the game. Against the Packers, they were actually an underdog on Thursday night. They ended up winning that game, and what do you know? Henry had a really good game. So when your team's an underdog and trailing, and they're not giving you the ball as much, yeah, it's going to be hard to go over your rushing prop number. But this week, Henry comes in this Tennessee Titans team as favorites. And they face Jacksonville, who ranks 32nd at tackling. And yeah, you know that you need to tackle Derrick Henry, especially in December, especially later in the games when he's only picking up more strength versus your defenders. So with all this said, I take the over on Derrick Henry. I have him projected for the most rushing yards on the week at 106, easily smashing this 82.5 prop here. Now let's discuss a Nick Chubb prop, another AFC running back who's a beast. His prop is set at 75.5 rushing yards, and this man just got the Sean Watson back last week. Now on the season, Chubb has been fantastic, averaging 93 yards per game on the ground. He's second in broken tackles. 70% of his rushing yards this year are after contact. So this is a pretty wild line, the fact that it's only at 75.5 rushing yards, right? Yeah, but not for the same reasons you may think. The Cincinnati Bengals ranked 6th in tackling, so it's not too much of a concern that Chubb is great after contact and great at breaking tackles. And Chubb is a 6-point underdog this week against the Bengals, and in similar spots this year, 2 similar spots, he only averages 55 rushing yards. Now his prop, I believe, is skewed at 75.5, and here's why. In week 8 against this Bengals teams, he put up 101 rushing yards, but he really did it on 2 big runs in this game, and this is just a 1-game sample. It's skewing the stat up improperly. Since this time, Bengals defense has gotten better. So with all that said, I take the under on Nick Chubb's 75.5 rushing yards. I have him for about 70 rushing yards in week 14. Now, what about Latavius Murray, the starting running back for the Denver Broncos? His prop this week is at 48.5 rushing yards, and on the season, he's averaging a little over 50 rushing yards per game, and a big part of this is because he hasn't had much competition. You recall that the Broncos released Melvin Gordon, and Chase Edmonds has been hurt, so there's really no competition at all these previous weeks. So despite Latavius Murray not being that great, 48th in yards per touch, 59th in true yards per carry, his actual production not that great, well, he's still getting the rock because there's not many other guys back there for Denver. So all of this is nice. He's going to get the touches. He's been going over 50 yards per game. You should be taking his over here, right? Wrong. There's some concern. First off, he's a 9-point underdog, and as an underdog this year, he's only averaging 41 rushing yards per game, so that's under this prop. And number 2, Mike Boone is back, and that sounds like, oh, it's just Mike Boone. No, this dude was seeing nearly 50% of the snaps before injury because he is top 10 in yards per touch, averaging 6 yards per touch. Way more efficient than Latavius Murray. Any week now, including this week, he might start taking more snaps away from Murray, especially since they're 9-point underdogs, and he's by far and away the better passing down back compared to Latavius Murray. Don't be shocked if Murray sees his snaps drop by 20% this week, which is why I'm taking the under here, as I have Latavius Murray projected for just around 42 rushing yards this week. And now for the best prop on the entire week. By far, it's a guaranteed winner, and that's Justin Herbert over a half a passing yard. Yes, this is not a mistake. It is over 1/2 a passing yard. He throws for 1 yard, you win. This is on prizepicks.com. You can use a free bet up to $100 when you click the link in the description and use the code SAL22. So here's the deal. Use the code SAL22, SAL22 on prizepicks.com, and if you put in 20, you get 20 right back. You put in 100, you get 100 right back, and then you can go get that free bet for Justin Herbert. Check it out right now with the link in the description. And then check out Ezekiel Elliott's rushing prop, which this week is 64.5. Now, recently, Zeke has been good, but can we still trust him this week? Well, the Cowboys are 17-point favorites this week, the largest favorite on the entire season, versus the Texans' run defense that ranks 30th in the NFL. So the environment sets up well, but is that good for Zeke, especially with Tony Pollard back there? Well, Zeke was injured in week 7, and since returning from injury, his snaps have increased every week. He only played 29% this week because it was a blowout against Minnesota right before Thanksgiving, but the snaps have been increasing, and with that, so has the production, last week going for 77 rushing yards. And now he faces a team in Houston who allows the most rushing yards this season, 100 plus more than any other team. So this is all great news, and Zeke is now averaging 5 yards per touch compared to just 4 yards per touch before rehabbing his injury. As a 17-point favorite, you can almost lock in 15 plus touches here for Zeke. And at 5 yards per touch, that easily takes us over 64.5 rushing yards, where I have Zeke around 80 rushing yards this week. Now, an interesting player for me is Deonta Foreman, who's coming off of the bye, and his prop is set at 55.5 rushing yards. There's a very simple formula this year for Foreman. When he is in a close game, he's going to see a lot of work. Since taking over as the starting running back when Christian McCaffrey was traded, he's played in 4 close games, and he averages 24 rushing attempts and over 119 rushing yards per game. I mean, literally, this is like RB1 overall usage. But in 2 games when his team has been trailing and losing big, like 20-plus point loss to Cincinnati, a 10-point loss to Baltimore, he's seeing only like 10 rushing attempts per game. Now, this week, he faces an average Seattle run defense, but the big thing, he's only a 4.5-point underdog, meaning the game, based on what Vegas is saying in the betting market, should stay close. And if that's the case, we are hammering the over 55.5 rushing yards for Deonta Foreman, who I have projected in the 70s this week, as I expect the game to stay close. So from the running backs, we go to the receivers now, and we move to Minnesota. And it's their wide receiver 3, KJ Osborne, who's kind of a random player, but his prop this week, and this is where you usually find the best numbers, is on these random players like Jack Stoll, like KJ Osborne, is just 23.5 receiving yards. But that low of a number, he hasn't topped this number in the last few games, only once in the last month. He's the clear wide receiver 3 behind Adam Thielen, behind Justin Jefferson. Even Dalvin Cook in the run game is a priority, so we're taking the under here, right? Wrong. You have to look at his splits without TJ Hawkinson, and that's these last 4 games where he's faced Buffalo, Dallas, New England, and the New York Jets. And these are 4 top 12 secondaries where he's had some really difficult matchups out of the slot. And now he faces the Lions, who rank 29th in coverage and allow the 4th most receiving yards to slot wide receivers. This matters because Osborne very very quietly ranks 5th in overall slot snaps this year and top 20 in routes run. He is one of the most involved and consistent wide receivers in terms of usage this season. And now the Vikings are slight underdogs with a strong team total of 25, meaning there's going to be a lot of yardage and points here. So yeah, I want him in this beneficial game environment, meaning I'm taking the over 23.5 receiving yards, as I have him easily in the 30s for receiving projections this week in the player props tool on Patreon. So we talked about a tight end earlier. Now let's talk about a rookie tight end, and that's the Giants tight end Daniel Bellinger, who his prop is set at 18.5 receiving yards. Rookie tight ends, it's usually hard for them to find production. He returned from injury last week. He only had 7 fantasy points, but the big thing, he had 5 targets, which led the Giants, and he played 97% of the snaps, practically did not leave the field. And now over his last 2 healthy games, he's played 97% of the snaps in each and led the Giants in targets in each game. The rare tight end, the rare rookie tight end that's involved and not leaving the field. We really just need 3, maybe 4 receptions here for this to pay off, but I'm going to be taking the over 18.5 receiving yards. I have him for 26 this week. So let's move from an NFC tight end to an AFC wide receiver. And it's the 30-year-old veteran wide receiver who's been dealing with injuries, Keenan Allen, whose player prop is set at 67.5 receiving yards. Good news for us, he easily cleared this number last week. And even more good news, his snaps since returning from injury, 32%, 66, 88, and now 96 have increased significantly every week to basically not leaving the field this past week. And since he didn't leave the field, he was rewarded with a lot of volume. 14 targets was easily a season high. He turned it into 88 receiving yards, topping that prop number that we just saw of 67. So we take the over, right? Well, let's discuss it a little more first before we decide. Because he did this last week, as you can see right here, against the Raiders, who have a bottom 5 secondary. And this week he faces Miami. Not a good secondary, but better than the Raiders. And the second big piece of information is that Mike Williams is expected to return this week. And last year, Keenan Allen only averaged 71 yards per game with Mike Williams. And since then, it's been another year and a lot more injuries that Allen has had to recover from. But the craziest stat of them all is the fact that Keenan Allen this year, as a 30-year-old wide receiver, has a career high in yards per reception, meaning that he's seen the best downfield usage of his career, which is rare for an older wide receiver who doesn't have speed or size. And that's because he's kind of been forced into that role without Mike Williams out there. So we should really expect his 14 yards per reception to probably drop to what it was the last 2 years, around 10 yards per reception. So the easy math here is if he's getting 10 yards per reception to clear 67.5 receiving yards, he needs 7, maybe 8 receptions. But he hasn't had 7 receptions in a game since week 12 of last year. And again, since then, lots of hamstring injuries and another year of wear and tear on the body. So this might be contrarian, but I'll take it. I have him under 67.5 receiving yards this week, as I have him projected for about 62 yards. Let's stay in the age category of 30 years old as we move to another elite player, a future Hall of Famer. And it's Mr. Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs, who finds his prop at 73.5 receiving yards this week. And this dude is fantastic, leading all tight ends in yards, in targets, in receptions, the triple crown for Travis Kelce. Any yardage number under like 100 seems low for this guy, but let's look a little bit deeper. He's a 9-point favorite this week, and in similar games in his career as this big of a favorite, he averages around 75 receiving yards per game. So okay, there's a little bit of information for us. But, and this is a big old booty, the Chiefs are running the ball a little bit more as of late. Last week, Patrick Mahomes threw a season low 27 times, and recently not even really going over 35 as of late, as they're trusting the rookie Isaiah Pacheco more to handle the rock. And I think this is a trend that is going to continue, especially as a 9-point favorite with a 33-year-old tight end. Maybe he takes a couple snaps off. I'm taking the under. This one might be tough to stomach, but under 73.5 receiving yards, as I have Kelce for 67 this week. Okay, so we started the show with Mike White's passing yards. What about his completions this week that sit at 22.5? Well, Mike White has started 2 games, and in his first game, he had just 22 completions against a poor Bears secondary, so he didn't hit this number then. And then last week against Minnesota, he actually had 30 completions, but it's because he threw the ball 57 times. On average, as an underdog like he is this week, he'll probably throw the ball around 32 to 35 times. And if we give him a 55 to 60% completion rate, which is normal for a player of his caliber, you're looking at around 20 completions, not 23, which is what he would need to hit the over on this prop. So we're taking both the under on his passing and his completions here at 22.5. I have him for around 20 completions this week. Now, I've taken all these props on prizepicks.com. So far in the year, we're 171 and 127 on official bets. If you want to tail any of these, get these same numbers, get that free Justin Herbert prop, just use the code SAL22 on prizepicks.com, and you'll get a free bet up to $100, meaning if you put in 50, you get 50 right back. You put in all the way up to 100, you're a kingpin, a head honcho, a heavy hitter, you get 100 right back. Just click the link in the description, and you can take care of it all there.